I'm going to talk a little bit this morning about my organization and then a specific program that we're doing in safety with the National Association of Counties, which is the elected official organization. But before I start, I want to just say that the presentations this morning have been really informative and enlightening and humorous. And I'll also remember the termite dung pile as a reference in the future. Very interesting. Also the analogy of obesity with traffic safety. I think that was a very good thing. But you've heard this morning from the educators, the professors, and also the researchers, and in fact the marketeers trying to define and talk about traffic safety culture. But now you're going to hear from three people who really are now in the trenches and out in the field and dealing with the issue on a day-to-day basis. And it is more than rocket science. There's no question about that. But in the case of our organization, certainly my members basically do planning, maintenance, operations, construction of county roads and bridges. And we recognize there's some great champions in our profession, those professional road managers that are out there, and trying to identify them is very important. We have several now around the country, in fact many around the country, and some we don't even know. The Sue Millers of Minnesota, the Richie Byers of Alabama, the David Patterson and Brian Kierlieber of Iowa, the David Brand of Ohio, the John O'Shell of Oregon. Many of these names you don't know, but these are the folks on a day-to-day basis that are dealing with traffic safety and mostly in rural areas. And so it's very important to recognize the importance of them, but also important to recognize that these individuals are the ones that really have direct access to what we think is the very key player in this equation of traffic safety culture, and that's the elected official. That's the person we need to educate and engage in changing the culture of traffic safety, and I would argue they are a key factor in this. And I'm not talking about just the elected county officials and local officials. I'm talking about those in the state legislatures as well. There's a vacuum of knowledge and interest and passion for certain issues, and certainly I would say the state legislatures are a part of that issue and problem and challenge in this case. So that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit today, a program that we're doing with the National Association of Counties and Federal Highway, and how we engage these elected officials. I'm going to talk about our organization just briefly. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan. We're in our 6th decade. We represent about 1,900 members around the country. And in fact, our members consist not only of county engineers, which is in our title, but any professional road manager at the county level, whether they're highway superintendents, whether they're road administrators, whether they're parish engineers in Louisiana. That's our members. And in fact, we have several partnerships with other organizations, federal organizations, the Forest Service and the Bureau of Indian Affairs, where we have actually members in NACE as well, called institutional members. And the third part of our membership is the Local Technical Assistance Program, the LTAPers, and I know we have a representative from the Montana State folks here today. And I mention them because they're very important to our business because they do 90% of the training for county professional road managers in the country, and a very important key player in the training and education of not only our members, but also back to the elected officials again. Roads, right now there's about 4 million miles of public roads in this country. Local government basically has 75% of those roads. Counties have about 1.74 million of those 3 million miles of roads. Bridges, we own certainly over half the bridges in this country are bridge structures, and a third of the nation's transit systems, although in many cases people, when they think of transit, they think of rail, but frequently the bulk of the transit systems are buses, and certainly buses that work in the rural areas of our country. There's our members, member states. We have state affiliates. They're autonomous. You notice that all of New England and some of the states along the East Coast, we don't have any members or state organizations. In many cases, those states do not have infrastructure under county government. It's usually in the state DOT or, in fact, local government boroughs and cities, not counties. So you have more of a weak county system in some of those states with regard to infrastructure. But you can see we're all over the country. Certainly the strength is in the Midwest, and certainly in the area that we're in today, we have a state affiliate in Montana as well. What do? Well, we certainly, NACE, do education and training, which I kind of alluded to when I talked about the LTAP program. We have our own national conference. But a big part of our business is advocacy, and whether it's establishing legislative priorities ourselves and convincing the elected officials to also adopt them, and we've been 100% successful in that area. Testimony before Congress, certainly visits to the Hill, information alerts for our members. We deal with these. We, in fact, represent counties frequently at the table in public hearings, whether it's bridge programs, safety programs, Waters of the USA programs. We actually are the speaking person that represents local officials, county officials at the table when we're before Congress. So that's a pretty important function for us. Last year, we did launch a very special campaign, and that's the Local Roads Matter campaign. And certainly, we have a place on our website which basically details that program. We actually had a needs assessment that we prepared that is available for viewing and downloading as well. It deals with the area of safety as well as other areas. But concern there is that our citizens don't realize how important local roads are to education, to families, to healthcare, to medical emergencies, to all sorts of things, to seniors. And as a result, we launched this campaign just to talk about that and to promote it. NACE has a series of safety initiatives in many areas. In fact, I had a member at our recent conference in Fort Worth who said, you know, there's so many things going on, you need a scorecard to keep track of who's doing what and what area of traffic safety. So I made a list of these particular items of certain things we're working on. And just to give them kind of a thumbnail of what we're working with, you'll see the item highlighted, the NACO contract with Federal Highway for county solutions to improve rural road safety, and that's what I'll talk about in more detail in a minute. But I wanted just to point out a couple things. One is our legislative positions, which is at the top. Safety is our number one priority. In fact, we do have a toward zero fatalities vision. We started very early in the process, and of late, the last couple of years, they've come up with a toward zero deaths, which is certainly a better phrase to use, but we're still on the toward zero fatality side of the house. But that's our number one priority. We have 3 issues in the next authorization. One is to expand the use of the HSIP program. Right now, many states are not, in fact, using that program on all public roads, which of course it should. They're pretty much doing the state road systems and not necessarily allowing counties to get involved with some of that money or get some of that money through suballocation. So we're trying to push that issue in the next legislation to make it more clear in that. Certainly, if you've all heard of the High-Risk Rural Roads Program. It was very meagerly funded in the last legislation. We're looking for the next legislation, a $1 billion program to help improve rural road safety. And I think it's important to mention that. And then the third area is the actual federal aid process and accessing money. Right now, money is so tight that we need to take advantage of all the monies that are out there. And federal aid is a key part of it. Well, right now, about 60% of our members don't pursue federal aid money because it's too hard. It's too complex in dealing with the federal regulations. So you're going to hear from Bernie Arsenault a little bit later about how Minnesota is approaching this and make the process of applying for federal aid dollars for traffic safety projects, which are invariably smaller projects, and making it more accessible through, let's say, a modified approval process, certainly getting blanket exemptions to certain types of reviews and historic preservation as an example, and other ideas around the country are occurring as well in that area. But that's the third link of our key legislative priorities in the safety areas, to make the system a little more streamlined, a little more easy for local government to access those federal aid dollars. The second thing I want to mention is the second bullet on there, and that's the Roadway Infrastructure Safety Coalition, or RISC. NACE is one of the founding members. Laura Parada in the audience is one of the founding members. Her organization, ATSA, is one of the founding members. And we basically have a rural road safety focus, and we have made many visits over the last year or so on the Hill with congressional members, with Senate staff on that issue, and certainly the Toward Zero Fatalities, more accessible money for rural roads. Things of that nature are high on our list and being promoted on a daily basis on the Hill. But as you know, not much is happening on the Hill. Mike briefly talked about the next authorization earlier this morning, and he said that he's thinking 2012 will be the year it's going to happen. It ain't going to happen in 2012, folks, because you know why? 2012 is an election year, but a presidential election year. So the real focus should be trying to get this done in 2011. And we know it's not going to happen in 2010, but 2011 should be the year we really focus on this. It ain't going to happen in 2012. And if it doesn't happen in 2012, we may never have a bill, as far as I'm concerned. And it's pretty sad if that happens. But that's my take on that whole issue, and I just wanted to share that with you briefly. Again, the NACO contract with Federal Highway, County Solutions to Improve Rural Road Safety, looked at 3 elements of engaging elected officials. One is the peer exchange network, one is the forums and workshops and webinars, and the third is the publications and outreach and resource center concept. And I'll get into a little bit of that now. The peer exchange program, let me quickly go through this. Identify rural counties with high crash and fatality rates, conduct a needs assessment of those counties, identify mentors, safety experts from around the country at the county level, or LTAP, I mentioned LTAP earlier, to work with these counties, select a certain number of counties, and provide information on road safety approaches that they could use and county safety plans, developing that, and then pair them up with safety experts over the long term to kind of develop plans and to implement programs that we are seeing that are successful around the country already. So that was the outline of this peer exchange program. And part of that was initially an assessment, and we did identify, by the way, about 531 counties which basically had, and they were rural counties primarily, that had high crash and fatality rates. And we basically surveyed those, and 22% responded to that survey, which was a very good response from our perspective. And they basically say 42% of those counties do maintain some sort of database and track the number of crashes and fatalities on their roads. About half of them had actually done road safety audits, and we were kind of pleased with that because that's a big program we've been pushing for a number of years, doing these road safety audits. Some of you who may not be familiar with road safety audits, they're a multidisciplinary team, including enforcement, including emergency medical response, including obviously the engineers or highway superintendents and others that kind of evaluate either corridors of roads or specific sites for safety improvements. And I'm talking about infrastructure now, primarily, although certainly could deal with other issues as well, from enforcement to certainly looking at access of medical facilities to that site. But at any rate, 42% or 50% say they've conducted road safety audits. 33% of those surveyed said they had a countywide safety program in place. Types of programs that were in place were kind of all over the territory. Some were using crash data to identify problem traffic areas and programming specific improvements to those areas. Others were conducting road inspections twice annually, identifying key signage and road repair areas for consideration. The other half was looking at driving routes on a weekly basis, certain corridors or routes, to identify by work order those safety-related issues. And many of them establishing traffic safety committees to actually evaluate generally the whole system. But at any rate, that was the initial needs assessment. We did, in fact, kick off this program at our annual conference, the NACE annual conference in Peoria, Illinois, last April, April 2009, so it's almost a year ago, April. To basically kick off this program, we had about 45 elected officials and county engineers and LTAPers there to kick off this program. And in fact, we asked them initially some questions to consider when they were dealing with their county action plans. Certainly you can take a look at this list, for instance, where we are now and some issues they need to look at, where we want to be, what barriers do you need to overcome, what resources are there, and ultimately involved with developing an action plan. When we got initial data from them, the first question, this is what we heard. Clearly they had very specific areas: removal of trees, animal collisions, pavement maintenance, road width, lack of shoulders, fixed objects, the old farm-to-market roads that really had not been looked at for a long time. Certainly resources, a big issue is the lack of funding now in state and local government. And obviously, as I discussed earlier, the issue of federal aid and the access to federal aid dollars was very limited. All of them mentioned the issue of data, not just the fact that you have available data, but how well it's coordinated within their state by all the agencies, and the lead agency normally being the DOT. So at any rate, those are some issues they did identify. We did ask them to tell us kind of initial things they may do as they left this workshop. And you can see here a list of items which they were going to pursue. Clearly we were stressing the road safety audits. A lot of them wanted to see what kind of GIS information they had available in the county on locating crashes and mapping them. Certainly looking for monies, not only from the state DOT point of view, but also for federal aid, public involvement team, and certainly working with their planning agencies and their council governments if it was a larger area. Again, we were dealing with rural counties primarily, so when we first surveyed them and selected these counties, these were rural counties. These weren't urban counties. But still, there are MPOs in many areas where urban counties are, and I would argue that many urban counties have a lot of rural roads. So we don't want to totally exclude the urban areas. So that was what we asked them to do. And over the last year or so, a process has been underway. Soon we'll be putting onto the special website we've established county action plans for reference so people can see what's being done around the country. But we're very pleased with what's going on and, in fact, happy with the results so far. We followed up 3 months later with a Saving Lives by Making Rural Road Safety a Priority workshop at the National Association of Counties annual meeting in Nashville, Tennessee. We had over 155 elected officials attend this session. That was the largest workshop they've ever had as far as attendance at an elected official conference. So we were very delighted with that. But we asked some questions. Certainly top priority issues you can see there: speeding, deterioration of roads, and obviously need for funding. First step was securing funding was their top choice. Barriers were funding and time. Remember, a lot of rural counties, the county engineer or, in fact, the person in charge of infrastructure is a one of one. They have to do everything. That can be difficult, so the actual resource issue of labor and time is important. Top countermeasures mentioned were retroreflectivity, shoulder repavement, safety edge. In fact, Mike, I noticed when we were driving up here yesterday, I was driving up here yesterday, you notice all that road coming in here had a lot of safety edge treatments. So did you do that before the conference just so it was done? But at any rate, concerns in the funding area certainly dealt with, in many cases, the suballocation of money at the state DOT. The state DOT is an important player in each state. They are the kind of the orchestrator, the controller of a lot of the money that becomes available for local government, so that's an important element of this process. That's the results of that particular workshop. We've had a series of webinars. You can see the list of webinars we've had so far. We are having a fourth webinar on retroreflectivity standards for signs and pavement markings. Clearly, we already have the regulations issued for signs, and in the next year or so, we expect another unfunded mandate from the federal government, and that's pavement markings. Make sure you pass that back to Mike. But nonetheless, it's an issue, and we need to talk about it. And in that particular webinar, we actually have some practicing traffic engineers who've done probably the best job in this country of implementing programs to improve signage and pavement markings in the area of reflective pavements and signage. So those are the webinar series, and that was part 2 of this program, the peer-to-peer exchange, the webinars and information programs. And then the last element of it was the Rural Road Resource CD, as well as a website where we basically have all kinds of information related to safety and rural road safety. And in fact, if you have a chance, please visit that website. It's on the National Association of Counties website. But I wanted to briefly mention the webinars we had. 127, 199, and close to 100 attendees and participants on our webinars we've had so far. And of course, I mentioned the fourth one coming up. But at any rate, the bottom line is we'll have this resource safety CD. We have a website that's dedicated to rural road safety on the National Association of Counties website. And we're delighted to say that the overall program is proceeding the way we expected. Actually, it's exceeding our expectations because of the participation by elected officials, although we do want to expand it. Building this program, engaging the elected officials at the local level, to us is the key to make the whole culture change occur. This is just a chart that shows you the kind of outline of how you develop a strategic local safety plan. I know Bernie will probably get into that a little bit in the next presentation in Minnesota, but this is some of the elements associated with it. Just quickly to let you know that our next annual conference, which will have also a safety focus, will be in Minnesota. So we'll maybe get Bernie to come down and talk to us there. It'll be April 17th to 21st, 2011. And Guiding with Vision, and there's the old North Star that they always love to promote in Minnesota. And if you need any information, you're welcome to contact me at any time. And just in closing, we take safety very seriously. Just the economic impact on local governments, the health impact on local governments is tremendous, and we've got to really recognize and really, as I said, engage those elected officials to understand how important this is, particularly since a lot of them are part-time, and in fact, they have a full plate. There are a lot of things on their plate. But somebody mentioned earlier the political will aspect. There is a tendency not to make those hard decisions, and we're hoping through this program, at least the program I discussed in detail, to engage those elected officials to make this happen, to provide those resources, and to make safety a priority in rural areas. Thank you.